Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is a dear friend of the show coming back for the second time. My guest today is Thomas Hiura, former candidate for mayor in Eugene, Oregon. He finished second place in the primary in a very crowded field. Thomas, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a good thing nothing's going on today.
I see you're doing some casual reading. What is that book? Joe Biden magazine?
It's the Joe Biden magazine, American Collector Special Edition.
I'm sure it smells.
Yeah, for the listeners, sorry, you're not seeing this beautiful Joe Biden photo of him eating ice cream that's been heavily memed and that you've probably seen anyway.
There is something weird about candidates during campaigns eating that I'm not sure I feel good about. I know my least favorite person to watch eat is John Kasich. So
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
Well, he just gets all in there. He's a Midwesterner.
Yeah. And then I'm pretty sure there was a clip, if I remember right, and I could be making this up, of Donald Trump eating a Snickers bar with a fork. So that is something that should not exist. He did eat pizza backwards in a commercial. That's a whole anyway.
Well, Obama came and ate at Prince Buckler's ice cream, so I thought that was pretty neat.
That is pretty good. That is good.
I wish they hadn't given John Kasich such a role at the DNC when they had neglected to give some other people a role.
AOC got like 14 seconds and John Kasich got like 10 minutes. It is ridiculous.
He was like standing out in a field.
Yeah.
But, you know, that just goes to show some of what we're going to talk today is about the approach that the Biden campaign and the Democratic National Committee took for what kind of a race to run. And we can talk about whether or not it paid off. Right.
So if anybody's unfamiliar with Thomas, you have your own podcast. And at the very end of this, we're going to talk about how you're going through kind of a rebranding. Your podcast is called Broken Class. I am a humongous fan of your show. If anybody's listening and they like, you're very welcome. They like my podcast, I highly recommend that you listen to yours, Broken Class, on all platforms, because it is kind of like what I do, you know, and you live in Eugene, I live in Springfield. So I've been covering a lot of Springfield politics. And so I think that we have a different technique, a different approach. You're pretty formally educated. I am a barber, you know, so there's these different kind of ways that we go about things, which I think is great, you know, and so we'll talk about that at the end of this. Also, we're going to be playing a song. Thomas is a hip hop artist. The name that you go by Gradient. And yeah. I'm also a big fan of your music. So I'm a big fan of you as a human being. This is really cool.
Wow. Even after I haven't got that collab verse back to you in like months.
I know we're doing a song about gay rights, basically, and just about embracing who you are and loving yourself. And it's a pretty song. So yeah, we'll get that done one of these days. So anyways, beautiful. Thomas, thank you for doing this. This is really cool. We're going to get right into it. You know, we're going to start talking about a lot of local stuff because that's kind of what my show has really became. Those are words. And then we'll get into the national stuff. But I definitely want to say before we get too far, Joe Biden, it has been officially announced that Joe Biden is going to be the 46th president. He was like my 9th choice, but I'm really excited about what he's going to do. He's really won me over more than I thought was possible. And then we're going to talk about this again at the end. Kamala Harris, this is a historic moment for women of color, for women, for America. So I know that you've got a lot of interesting things to talk about with her. So we'll get to that in a bit. I wanted to focus on the local stuff first, and then we'll get into the national stuff. So let's just get right into it. The biggest takeaway from the local election in Eugene. So I'll focus a little bit on Springfield in a minute, but let's hear what you have to say, that your face value first, big takeaway from the Eugene recent, 2020 election.
Oh, that's a great question. I would say that in the city council and mayor races, we had a lot of the people win who you would expect to win. There was one race that was competitive, and it was in Ward 1. But I would say that within the system that we use, it's rare for a primary to go all the way into the general, or you have a competitive race in the general for a city seat. So that was Ward 1. Eliza Kaczynski was a challenger for Emily Semple, who was a one-term incumbent city councilor. This is kind of like central Eugene. It's a really neat ward. It's just north of the South Hills. It's just east of West Eugene. It's right there in the heart of Eugene. And it actually ended up being a bigger margin than I expected, with Emily Semple taking, I think, 19-point lead. About 60-40 is how it went. And where I would tell you that with no disrespect at all to either the candidates, because I think they're both competent people. First of all, the race became a little more negative than was expected, I would say, for Eugene. Eugene does not dive that much into contentiousness that gets on full display in the public. I'm sure people keep their private feelings to themselves about their opponents and the opponent's camp. But I was, there was a lot of mailers, and there was a lot of sort of rumors about campaign contributions with the challenger candidate, and I think that they were very overblown. But basically, what I would say I was a little bit cynical about is that, and for this small city council race, like, it took a lot of money for both of those candidates to be competitive, and that's not something I really want to see. But tons of yard signs. Emily Semple owns a graphic design company, so it's not too surprising she would have tons of yard signs, tons of mailers.
So
big,
that
like
name,
it's like a 4-page magazine she was sending to people, basically.
Wow. So I have to be honest. Since I bought a home in Springfield, and I really hit it hard focusing on Springfield races this year, I didn't follow a lot of the stuff going on in Eugene, since I wasn't going to be voting for it. But I've seen Emily Semple's name everywhere, and because the yard signs were very prevalent. So name recognition can be really big for a campaign. I don't have any input on the character of either candidate because I didn't follow it. You did a podcast with one of them, is that correct?
Yeah, I podcasted with Eliza Kaczynski, and I told her out front, I was like, maybe at the end of this I'll endorse you, which is something I had done with Doyle when I interviewed her. And I also joked that my endorsement is not particularly meaningful, but we talked about the Charlie Landeros mural, the Fibers of History mural that's downtown. And I thought that her answer was sincere and warm, but I was a little bit surprised by the fact that she hadn't seen the mural in person. Of course, in COVID, a lot of people are staying home, and that's helpful and important. She clarified at first, because I thought she hadn't even seen photos of it, but then she clarified that she had seen some of the photos, but she didn't want to weigh in too much about it without having seen it. And so, that was one of the things where I told her that I believed she would win, and turns out I was wrong. But it was an incredibly competitive primary, and the fact that she netted over 30% of the vote in the primary in a field of 6 was pretty remarkable and really impressive. So she'll continue to be in the conversation. She was speaking a lot about urgency of solutions for homelessness, for unhoused communities, and affordable housing, etc. And she'll continue to be an advocate on those issues. I would say that within the city of Eugene, 9.6% for a write-in campaign, for a combined write-in total for Isaiah Wagner or a couple other people who might have thrown in a more low-key write-in campaign. That's pretty impressive. Lucy Venice, of course, sealing 90%.
It's Freudian at this point. Yeah.
No, I love Lucy. I've come to really, really like Lucy, although I disagree with a lot of the leadership style and tenor and just direction. But I also recognize that nobody can know what it's like to be in that seat unless you're really there.
I can't imagine. The Eugene mayor is a difficult position. And now, again, I mentioned at the beginning, if someone might have missed it, that you were a candidate in the primary and were second place in a very crowded field. You weren't part of the Solidarity platform. Is that correct? There was a Solidarity group. There was a few candidates that kind of grouped together that said, we don't care who you vote for one of us. We want to make sure that that Lucy Venice does not receive 50%, 51%. That was the goal.
Yeah, they ran multiple candidates in Ward 1, and they ran multiple candidates for mayor. So that kind of shows you that they were seeking to claim space in the electoral process based on where they were living in the city, and not necessarily that they were all trying to sort of pile in for one person, right? And the goal with that race was to try to make a competitive November race, because a lot of the lay people who are not political junkies, they're not going to vote in the primary, or they're not going to vote in down ballot races in the primary. Maybe they would still want to support Bernie, but unfortunately it wasn't a competitive presidential primary by the time May 19th rolled around. So that kind of suppressed things, but we combined to net about 33% of the vote, and so that wasn't enough to reach the 50% with the 6 challenger candidates. That would create a top 2 runoff where it would have been myself versus Lucy Vinnis. But I would tell you that I wasn't a part of their platform. I had my own campaign that I had been running for months and months prior to their decision to come together and make that statement and do what they did. They kind of put all of their websites on one website. It was a really cool thing.
I really like it.
Yeah. So I kind of worked closely with them. We did an event or two, very COVID safe. But yeah, I was not part of them, in part because of slight ideological differences as well. I probably wouldn't say, I'd probably say on some things I was not as far left. But in the spirit of, a whole bunch of the things that they were talking about, I support.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that the more voices you can have, especially in a primary, is really important. Now, on any level, I've kind of learned, on a national level especially, I've learned that the primary is the place for, I don't want to call it a protest vote, but to kind of rock the boat. You know what I mean? Where you can have candidates that are against the norm. In the general election, we kind of have to look at the candidate that has the best chance to defeat the person that, we'll get into that in the national stuff. Now, you had mentioned voting down ballot, and we had talked about Isaiah Wagner, who ran a campaign in the general election, a write-in campaign. He was a guest on both of our podcasts. We approached it much differently. I was a little easier on him than you were. You kind of asked tough questions, which Isaiah welcomed. I really,
exactly.
and I'm going to talk about this a lot on this episode because your podcast is great. Broken Class. I'm going to mention the name a bunch of times. You can search for it on any podcast streaming site.
Like Broken Glass, but with a C.
Right. And there's YouTube videos as well. So Isaiah, your guys' conversation was just, oh my gosh, it was so good because you touched on so many difficult topics and had an open dialogue with no judgment. And there was some things said that you vehemently disagreed on that I thought it was just a really good conversation, and I think that there was a lot of people from different belief systems that could listen to that and get something good out of it. So even though this is a past thing, I don't think that it's an out of date conversation that you were having. Just because the election is over, the conversations you were having are things that are really just picking up steam. So it's something I recommend. But Isaiah should be commended on his run and the people that he was. I saw a lot of support and bringing people to the table as far as using their voice to vote and to turn out, that would then vote down ballot, however they saw fit. And it wasn't just Democrats that he was getting support from. There was people that were non-affiliated and probably some Republicans that were voting, being that there was not a challenger on the ballot in the mayor race. I think that opened the door for more right-leaning people to be like, well, then I'm going to write this guy in, he's running a campaign and I want to rock the boat a little bit. So there was that.
Well, he was pretty careful and selective about his policy ideas and goals that he had laid out. And, one of them that is important to him was the tax system. And he kind of acknowledged that it wasn't something that the city would have a ton of control over in terms of the overall tax burden of an Oregonian who lives in Eugene. That's a lot more of it is at state and additionally federal level. But, just talking about how he's pulling in different constituencies from across the political spectrum, as it were. And I would say that, you talked about how we had conversations that were about things that are, kind of difficult or controversial or something. I ask people at the beginning of my show all the time, what's a controversial opinion that you have about anything? And that's one of the only questions that I have in the can. Otherwise, it's a very open dialogue, kind of
Right.
like you. And that's because, I believe what I love about podcasting as a medium is it's so accessible and widespread for people who do care about it and like it, where we can step away from this, like, exorbitant brevity, this just like tiny slices of, like, I'm just firing off, like, this social media just like incentivizes, particularly Twitter, short jabby statements. And I really do think of it as like a stab. Like when you're talking on Twitter, it's like people are looking at a big gaseous cloud of like gray information that's swarming, and nothing, and you're trying to have something that jumps out of the cloud like into
Yeah.
people's faces. And it's
Just
like
punchlines.
yeah, you have to be sharp and you have to try to stab your information out there. I don't know. It's like and that's not always bad. Sometimes it can be hilarious.
Right.
Sometimes it's really funny to see, like, oh, like Doug Emhoff, now the elected second gentleman, who's Kamala Harris' husband, tweeting this really serious thing. And then there's like some like ridiculous meme. And then there's like a Peter DeFazio tweet. And then, it's just like, it's a variety show.
Sure.
But with podcasts, you can dig deep into things. And then I try to make it accessible to people who don't listen to podcasts all the time by time stamping the topics. If you go to any of the YouTube videos, maybe not 100% of them, but YouTube has this great feature now where you can easily put chapters in a longer video, so that I could jump straight to 30 minutes in, 45 minutes in, to talk about, this controversial. For me, I'm thinking of the topics that are controversial, but also I always try to ask people in the political world, especially candidates for office, about what music inspires them, and try to dig into the humanity
Right.
of people.
And yeah, that's the beauty of the podcast, is that you can really hear the tone and the tenor of what somebody's about. And
Right.
I really encourage anybody listening to go check that one out. It was a really good episode, and all of your episodes are good. And again, we'll get into the rebranding and stuff at the end of this. We got a lot to go over, so we're gonna have to move along. But I want to mention, in the Springfield City Council race, I had both guests on: Corey Rodley, Johannes Tadeo. Corey Rodley was the winner. Johannes has a bright future in Lane County politics. The outreach that he does for the homeless population and for the Latinx community is humongous. So you're going to hear that name again. So Johannes Tadeo ran a really good campaign. I think he ended up with like 44 or 45% of the vote. So it was, he did really good, and he's a young guy. I mean, so he's got a bright future. But Corey Rodley will mix up city council in a time where Springfield needs something of a breath of a fresh air. Now there's going to be someone else appointed to city council soon, because they'll be appointing a new mayor, and we'll be paying attention to that closely. And I'll have people on to talk about it. My prediction is that it's going to be Sean Van Gordon, and we'll see how that goes. So Corey Rodley was a great choice, though. And I didn't make an endorsement in that, and I'm not going to say who I voted for. I voted for both of them. So no, I'm just not going to get into it. But so that was a good one. Now, some of the ballot measure 110 is the decriminalization of drugs. That's obviously the one that's getting the most national news. And then in the barbershop, the week of this election, that was the one that was having the most conversation, because I think that nobody knows what it actually means or how it works or how it's going to be played out. And that's why I kind of wish it would have, in my opinion, been shot down, because if we don't know how things are going to be implemented, then the conversation needs to be longer. And this is why campaigns are long. I wish I would have had more time to focus on it. We did an episode in opposition of that. But what are you hearing?
I saw it.
Yeah, about ballot measure 110. What are you hearing? Just kind of the buzz on the street. A lot of people are for it, but there's people that were for the idea that were against the measure. So,
right.
What is your take on it?
Hey, well, that is ultimately where I was, Patty. Was that I really believe in decriminalization of these substances, because of the exorbitant prison population of this country, where we go after people based on consuming, a substance, and possibly giving them a long prison sentence, or, coupling that with, other sentences that amount to a really, really troubled and challenged and in many ways ruined life based on, those sorts of personal decisions. And so there were issues with the measure, though, that were financial, that were really, really concerning to me as someone who cares deeply about education.
Yeah.
And I got this information from fellow teachers, but I also was better informed on the whole issue from a treatment provider perspective, because of your episode with Chris Wigg, who's a program director at Emergence addiction recovery specialist, and also the chair of the Democratic Party of Lane County. So he's got a lot of wisdom on kind of multiple fronts of that measure. I didn't fully agree with what he was talking about, as I think I told you, but because I'll just unpack that briefly and then I'll talk more about the measure. What the measure is doing is it's taking money from other places in the state budget and putting them into assessment and treatment opportunities for people who, get, like, let's say, found with a possession charge or something. And my biggest opposition to what Chris said, though he really made me wiser about why the money wouldn't be the most productive thing, was he basically came at it and said, as one part of what he was saying, that if you have, a small amount, if you have any amount of one or two drugs, I think
Heroin
and meth, right, in your pocket, then that is a problem, and you have a problem, and that needs to be treated. And I think the automatic nature of that assumption just troubled me a little bit, because I just thought it was a big leap to make. However,
yeah,
in many cases, and from his perspective, I can totally understand why he would say something like that. He has seen firsthand many people who struggle with addiction and with these very serious, with addictions to these drugs that can become incredibly serious and can take over a person's life and jeopardize their, relationship with their family and with having a home and etc. I'm such a hyper specific person, which is why I like podcasts. I didn't like that, but he did have some wise things to say about how in the state of Oregon, if you go to a treatment provider to go into a program with them, they have to conduct their own internal assessment anyway. So the state funded one before would become redundant. Right. And so that was one of the things. And the financial issue that I talked about was mostly that across a 4-year period, ballot measure 110 is going to take $90.1 million from the state school fund, which is going to be a difference maker for public education. And the Oregon state public education, the state of things around here is dire, it's dismal, and I can really hardly support anything unless it's like miraculous in other ways, right, that would reduce the state school fund.
Yeah, I voted against it, because I thought that there was a lot of problems with it. Actually, yeah. So anyway, Springfield fire, Springfield fire levy passed. I had the fire chief on my podcast, and it was great to hear what they had to say. I think it was a pretty much a no-brainer after what we witnessed with up the McKenzie. Surprisingly, Lane Fire Authority, which I don't know a ton about this, so I don't want to speak too much on it. It was voted down, and I don't know much about that. That's a more of a rural fire district. Maybe they just didn't want to pay the tax. Pleasant Hill voted to save their fire department from dissolution, so that was good. There's not too much to discuss. I mean, that was pretty much. There was 3 different things in Lane County on fire departments. 2 of them passed, 1 of them didn't. The way that the fire department is ran, Eugene, Springfield being one department, I'm sure that the Lane Fire Authority, maybe it was redundant. Maybe they can cover that area. Sometimes the response time might be slow, but I don't know. I don't know enough about that. But I did want to touch on that I'm glad that the Springfield voters voted that through, because in a time where we saw fire devastate the community and was threatening Springfield, and I don't know, I mean, people can debate that, but when there's evacuations past Thurston High School, that's pretty scary. I mean, it was pretty wild, and it was happening so fast. Now, I'm not sure if this will happen because of different things, and I don't want to make a huge announcement right now because it's not confirmed. But my plan next week is to interview someone that was affected by the fires that lost their home. So that's something that's in the works. And so I will be covering that. So we'll talk a lot about the McKinsey Fire Department, the McKinsey fire, the Holiday Farms fire in the coming weeks. So that should be really good. Peter DeFazio, this was a really close race. I'm not surprised it was because of the amount of money.
Not that close.
Well,
but closer than it had been in the past with his previous challengers.
Right. Art Robinson, who has ran against Peter DeFazio 142 times because they've both been in that running for Congress for the last 120 years.
I think it was 5 cycles. Legitimately,
which is pretty wild. It was like the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington Generals or whatever it is, where it was just kind of goofy. But Scarlato,
I have it on good authority that DeFazio told people in his circle for a long time, Art Robinson is the best thing that ever happened to me.
Sure.
Because he's such a kook that he was able to be easily defeated, and DeFazio could focus on legislating and not as much on campaigning.
Yeah. So Scarlatos was really popular in my neighborhood. I know that there was lawn signs to prove it. I always think it's interesting when people use the military. They're like, they were in the military. And I'm like, well, I mean, that's cool. There's great people that served and there's people that aren't so great that served, just because you did does not make a qualification. And that's my opinion. Maybe that's a controversial opinion, but that you were talking
a lot of people it could be. But DeFazio is also in the military.
Sure. Right. And so, I mean, obviously Chris Kyle, a person like that comes to mind where some people think he's a hero and other people think he's gone now. So let's not talk about that. But
I mean, it's such again, I hate to, and I feel like I'm interrupting you, but I hate to try to unpack everything and say, oh, that's too broad of a statement, but that's fundamentally who I am. A lot of the times
sure.
I get into the weeds. So yeah, the general idea that because somebody had served in the military is just too broad for me to make an assessment about whether or not what they did with their service was good or bad.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is that was the big selling point of him. Some of the comments that were used in campaign ads about him not believing in a minimum wage maybe were taken out of context. It sounded like a recording of his voice. So that was pretty powerful, and being against another stimulus, I think that probably had a little bit more nuance to the campaign ad, the whole, like what maybe a podcast would have been a good thing. I'm sure they existed. I did reach out to a couple people that were U of O students, college Republicans that never came to fruition that were very strong supporters of Alex Carlatos that I was interested in having on, but no response. So they weren't interested in finding my audience, the votes there. So that didn't happen. Okay. I was in the primary, I supported Doyle Canning. I'm a big believer in Doyle Canning. I think she has a really bright future. She was gracious enough to come on and give her endorsements in the general election recently on my podcast. And that was an incredible episode. You can tell that she's relaxed now. She worked really hard on her campaign. And DeFazio has a really, really strong base, so.
Oh yeah.
So he's done a lot for a lot of people in our community. I'm a big fan of DeFazio, and I wanted that to be clear when I endorsed her, that it wasn't when you have these primaries, you can like multiple candidates. You have to pick the one you like and try not to destroy the one you don't, because that might be the one you're voting for in the end.
Great example of that is County Commissioner South Eugene. We don't know how much we'll get into that, but Lori Trieger versus Hoeli Boa. Come on, 2 people who are gonna serve, in my opinion, Pete Sorensen's legacy well. And Lori Trieger won by about 8 percentage points. But they both were running, somewhat historic campaigns. Lori will become the first woman to represent that district, not the first woman to represent Lane County on the Board of Commissioners, but still, and just her background, and talking a lot about how she has received services from the county and seen everything from sort of all perspectives with her nonprofit work and her, decades of work. And then Hoeli Boa, who I always knew growing up as Joel, just depending on how you want to pronounce it, would have been the first Latinx county commissioner, and also just has a incredibly impressive resume, not even for his age, because that will often be said, like, oh, for your age you've done a lot. He's just kicked
Just
ass in this
period.
community
Sure.
and grew up here, and has I've known him a little bit peripherally because we never went to school together, but for a long time. And he's a powerhouse, particularly with immigrant rights and his work with Causa Oregon, but also with environmental advocacy. So yeah, that was the only competitive county commissioner race.
Yeah.
But
we talk about these firsts, okay, and I want to touch on this first. First woman in a seat, first person of maybe Latinx, and you were running not only as potentially the first mayor of color in Oregon, but also someone that considers himself non-binary, and so you're really open with pronouns. I slip and say he. I'm not great at it, and you've made it clear to me that you're accepting of any pronoun, and I think that's really cool. And I respect people, and I'll try to respect it by using the proper ones. Now
it's my personal decision at this point,
Sure.
And I love that the conversation is becoming more inclusive of people with pronouns that maybe aren't even he, she, or they.
Sure.
But I know where I live, and I know where as someone trying to do politics, like I really do want to get elected at some point. It's not just that I'm running for vanity or for saying like I'm gonna be this like first non-binary candidate here. It's like, no, like this is something that we have to normalize over time, that I believe that should be normalized. And one thing about me is that I'm not dissing people who have a different view than this, but I'm very open to people not agreeing about a whole host of different things. And right now, for very understandable reasons, people say, like, if you don't agree that my gender identity is real or something, then we can't have a discussion. We can't be friends. You are disrespecting something that's fundamental to me, and that must come from or whether that comes from a place of hate or not, that must be it's too big of a chasm for us to bridge, and I don't particularly feel that way. That could be a result of certain privileges that I have, or it could just be a result of like always having an incredibly open-minded view of who I can be friends with and who I can associate with, from growing up in Santa Clara, northern Eugene, just
Sure.
getting along with a bunch of working class kind of people who didn't go on to get a massively privileged education like I did from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to go to, a couple of really fancy schools and Ivy League, blah, blah, blah. So, it's a hard thing for me to even say, because I sit here and I'm like, I don't want to diss anybody, because again, like, people who are doing some of the work to make me have more rights, like, I appreciate those people.
Sure.
It's just, this guy, I maybe I'm such a ham, but I believe in what he says about Joe Biden saying, he wants to unite the country. And
that's the goal. And I get what you're getting at with that. Now, what I was touching on with the check in a box kind of situation, where certain candidates will be the first in an area. The big, in the Springfield City Council race that I follow really closely, Johannes being of the Latinx community and bringing new voters to the table, which we had mentioned before about people that vote down ballot, whatever party. I think that the more people that vote, the more that democracy is served, and so what happens, why I've had these different views that I've kind of battled with over the years, where people are like, well, I don't want to vote for someone because of what they are. That you vote for who they are, you vote for them as an individual. And so sometimes people they're like, well, I'm not going to vote for them just because of, just because they're black, or just because they're gay, or whatever it is. The reason that I think certain groups need to be represented, especially on city council, is because there is no representation. So when we're having these stories where we talk about the first of this group, that is historic, and that is necessary for us to provide a perfect union, or get progress towards a perfect union, because there's so many people that are not heard from. You have told me off of air, and I hope this is okay to say because it may have been off the record or whatever, about being of Asian American descent and whatnot, and how representation on television mattered so much to you.
Oh, absolutely.
And so when you get representation, there's just certain things. Johannes told me about something about literature being published in a political fashion that's in Spanish, and why it's so important to certain communities. Yes, they may speak English, but maybe they're not as comfortable with it. It's not their first language. So why these people matter just as much as anybody else, so
Right.
we need to let them be a part of the process because they deserve representation, and so I think that
Right.
sometimes
Well,
if there's a
here's
tie, if both candidates are great, I might
right.
I might then be like, well, the edge is going to go to the minority in this situation because of the fact.
Viewing it as a factor in your assessment of what they bring to the table, literally to the table, to the dais of power that they're going to sit on, I think is totally relevant. I would totally agree with the statement that I would not vote for somebody, and you should not vote for somebody just based on the fact that they have a representational sort of box that they can check off, that they have an identity that is different or that hasn't been seen. Never a great reason to vote for them, but totally a thing to consider in the whole context of their candidacy. Same with affirmative action. People like Abby Fisher, back in when she didn't get into UT Austin, was really upset and basically thought it was racist against her as a white girl. And you know what? There are tons and tons of qualified white people that get into UT Austin, and her grades were average. I'm so maybe that's the Asian in me, but I'm like, sorry, hun, your grades were average. And schools benefit from, and communities benefit from, engaging respectfully across diverse lines.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, gosh, we could do a whole podcast about this.
Oh yeah,
because
we should. We have a lot to cover. So yeah, I mean, we definitely should, and I want to, the first time I had you on the podcast, I didn't know you, and the more that we've built this friendship, the more that it opens up new doors for new conversations. And so this is one thing I love about the show, is bringing people back on, building the relationship. People get to experience me having this growing bond with my guests. And it's a beautiful thing, because you and I mean, I consider you to be somebody I admire, respect. We don't agree on everything, but I definitely learn from you every single time we talk. So that's really cool.
I'm not a Celtics fan. I can't fuck with that.
You shut your mouth. But so anyways, especially since the Lakers just won the championship, I don't want to get into that. So
LeBron's the GOAT, like the GOAT.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. Anyway, so the Democratic supermajority, this is the last thing we're going to talk about locally. The Democratic supermajority in Oregon winning both houses and the Secretary of State. That is really big because redistricting is on the horizon. And if the Republicans decide to walk out like they have in the past, then, they're not needed in this now. So this is why elections matter. I know that we heard that a lot from Trump. The elections matter, that's where the Supreme Court is being chosen. So in the coming years, Oregon is controlled by the left now. And so we're going to see it go farther left. And this is why elections matter. And when you choose a candidate like Donald Trump to be so divisive, not only do you motivate people on that side, you also motivate people to run against it, like an Isaiah Wagner that was bringing people to the table that was then, wait a minute, I don't like this, and vote against it. There's just, there's a lot of stuff that happens down ballot. And so that's a big thing. What is your take on that, on the supermajority and what that means for the state?
The very first thing I would say is that Oregon state legislature is controlled by the Democrats, and looking at where each district is and who's really representing them, you could really complicate the idea that the Democrats equals the left. There are people like, let's say in Portland, I'm very excited about Con Pham. She won a seat in the House of Representatives. She's very left. But there are people like Nancy Nathanson in North Eugene who is liberal, but is she really left? She's just, I don't think she would call herself a leftist. So anyway, but I totally I'm not here I am being nitpicky again, right?
No, that's good.
But
I understand what you're saying. I mean, I guess my
Mhm.
point being that politics are about coalition building. So you're going to have people that are,
Right.
I mean, this is a Joe Biden presidency that just happened that we're going to transition into talking national now. That Joe Biden is somebody that is very moderate, but he was able
Sure.
to get the support, maybe because of Trump, was able to get the support from the progressives and from everybody else, But I mean, this
Well,
is
what we need to see in our state government is, my state senator, James Manning. You're familiar with him, Senate District 7. He's a powerhouse. He's a former military veteran, and he's one of two black state senators that we have. And his wife LaWanda is amazing, and they just like really in there with the community, well known, going to events. He's gonna. I want him to work on policies with Art Robinson now. Art Robinson has a state Senate seat now. He won. And now they're in the state Senate. There's only 30 people in that body. You gotta reach across the aisle and get things done,
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say for statewide races, congrats to Shamia Fagan. I didn't vote for her in the primary. And she seems like she has a rising star potential. Kate Brown was initially Secretary of State, right?
Right.
She ran
Yeah,
against Rick Dancer and won.
against Rick Dancer, and I'm not going to get into the Rick Dancer stuff, but Rick Dancer could have been governor, so
Right.
so we could be in a different world, and that's
Well, I didn't follow this too closely, but Bev Clarno, the current Secretary of State, she's a Republican. She was appointed after Dennis Richardson passed away, I believe. I don't seem to have any issue with that I know of with how she's governed.
Sure.
So, and being the only statewide Republican that like Oregon Republicans had in office, like, that's a big role to be able to like basically feel like you're the top representative of all Republicans in the state. And Oregon prides itself on, the Secretary of State's main role is to facilitate the elections and,
Right.
Making it a very democratic process, making it as easy as possible to vote. Maybe I would like to see Oregon having a little bit of a later registration deadline, for example. Many
Same
states
day.
have same day registration.
Yeah.
Could that be done in Oregon? It might be a little tricky with our system. But
Speaking
I'm
of
just
that,
basically saying she did fine in my view.
we're talking about voting in Oregon, and Secretary of State is who oversees that, and voting in Oregon. I mean, with COVID, we were equipped for this. Nothing is different for us. Now, I looked this morning just because I was going over some of these races. Oregon, as of this morning, had 82% of the vote was counted. 82%. So there's still progress. This is normal. This is normal for us. So people are like, why is it only one day? I mean, I think in the past, some of the calls in different races are premature. I think Arizona is going to be one that Fox announced it early, and that might have actually controlled the narrative to help Biden, in a lot of ways, as far as the narrative, the conversation nationally, where, I mean, they announced it today, but I mean, it's just interesting to watch this play out with mail-in ballots across the country and how unprepared certain states were because it's such a new thing. I love mailing my ballot in. Well, we dropped it at a Dropbox. I love voting from my kitchen table, I guess is what I should say. I absolutely love it because I can fill it out for a week. I mean, I sit there and I think about it and I'm like, well, let me sleep on that. Because sometimes you don't even know what's on the ballot until you get it in the mail. And so not sometimes, every time there's something that I'm like, oh, I didn't know about this. The decriminalization of drugs. I didn't know about it until a couple weeks before the actual vote. And that's not the way that things should be done. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. And that's why you do your podcast, or one of the reasons. I can't speak for you, but I'm sure you agree, that we can try to at least raise awareness for these topics.
So there's only one other place where I voted, because I grew up in Oregon, obviously, and that was Minnesota, 2016. I caucused for Bernie in the primary, I've been to a caucus. It's kind of goofy and different, but it's also kind of cool. I don't really support it because it tends to favor the elites. Like it tends to favor people who have more and more time to devote to politics and go and caucus. But then I voted early in person for Hillary Clinton and Angie Craig, the congresswoman who won. And so anyway, she actually won in 2018 though.
We're getting some feedback on your side. I don't know if you need to shake the cord. Sorry. So not to cut you off, but we're just getting a little feedback.
Okay.
That's much better.
Okay, good.
Sorry,
Thank you.
technicals.
I can't hear it on my side.
Yeah, I know. So
But all I'm saying is when you go in the booth, you don't have a ton of time, like, or at least you feel the pressure of the people behind you and around you to see the ballot for the first time and see what you're going to be voting on. Like, I think that I benefited a lot as a mayoral candidate, particularly because I wanted to have a good looking website, and I feel I did a pretty good job of that. I'll do better next time. But like people can sit at their kitchen table and be like, who am I voting for as my fucking mayor? Like one of the most influential people over my day-to-day life.
some of it, one
you
of the
know,
reasons, I mean, you ran a good campaign, and don't take this the wrong way when I say this, but your face and picture and story being in the voters pamphlet was very beneficial. Some of the candidates did not. I'm not talking about if that equated to votes. I don't have any studies to support that. But what I'm saying is I know a lot of people that I've
it
talked
definitely adds to votes
big
to be in there
big
versus to
time,
not. Yeah.
and so there's a whole process. And so, I mean, there's a lot to it. So we have a lot to cover. So we're gonna have to get through it because we're already getting up towards an hour. But Georgia, it looks like Biden is gonna win Georgia. I don't know if that's been called, but Stacey
It's going to
Abrams.
go for a recount.
Okay, but
It's
Stacey
so
Abrams,
close that it's going to do that.
regardless,
Yeah.
to flip that, even to get to this point, Stacey Abrams deserves a tremendous amount of credit. Now, Stacey Abrams is the face of this movement to get people to out to vote and new registered voters in Georgia. But you had posted something. There's a list of people that were people that should be recognized in that. She wasn't alone in that work, which you can never do anything again. I'll say it a million times. Politics are coalition building. Stacey Abrams was defeated with it, that we could be here forever, but in Georgia in the race for governor. And then, but she ran an incredible campaign and she was kind of screwed in that one. It sounds like there was voter suppression and stuff going on there because
she ran against the Secretary of State in Georgia, who was how can you be the referee and be the LeBron? Sorry.
Well,
Kevin Garnett.
LeBron is in cahoots with the referees, but that's a different for a different time. No, right. So I mean, Stacey Abrams is the face, of Georgia in this election. Even if it falls short, she deserves a ton of credit. And how many people she motivated across the country to get out and vote in the Black community and just in general, and I'm a firm believer, the more people that vote, the better. I think that we should have 100% turnout. There should be no less. So 100, and that was a big one. So I want to talk about the 70 million people that voted for Trump. Okay, so right under 70 million people voted for Trump, and we are finding ourselves more divided than ever. It's interesting when you talk to someone maybe from the right that they'll say that Obama was the most divisive president. I would obviously disagree with that and say that Trump is the most divisive president, and the division that because Obama, in my opinion, tried to lead for all Americans. He said it constantly. I believe him. Even George W. Bush would say all Americans. Donald Trump said red states, blue states, red states, blue states. That's division, and Joe Biden has been quoted as saying our opponents are not the enemy. It's time to lead for all of America. What do you say to the people who see the opposing sides? So you see the voters on the opposing side as a threat to democracy?
What a challenging thing to say, especially looking at where people from different walks of life come at this issue. It's different than me and it's different than you. And I can't make a serious blanket statement, but I can say that where I come from on it is that I have seen people that I've felt that I have legitimately really, like, I'm a nostalgist. I look back at like my younger days with people I played basketball with and baseball with and had history class with, and like just like we worked on a project together, or we had this great game against Sheldon and we like had a buzzer beater shot where it was all awesome. And I look back at those memories and those friendships and I see clearly now, or I can probably assume that a lot of those people now support Trump. And I know from my relationships with those people that they matter to me and I matter to them, and we have a connection. It might not be a strong connection anymore, but we follow each other on Instagram and we're connected as friends on Facebook, and maybe we comment on something once in a while or like a post once in a while, right? But to me, those things really matter. And I know that being pulled into something that is orchestrated by a con man is it's probably, we've all been duped by various things, you know. And or am I being too condescending? Maybe they don't feel they've been duped. Maybe they really, like, people vote in their self-interest, and they're willing to look away from so many things that should turn us off about this particular person. And I don't absolve them of that. I think that was a real error on their part, but maybe we live in very different worlds. And how can we then I think ultimately, is the idea that we're going to kill those people or make them go to Mars? I don't think so. You know, I talked about that in my music in 2014, when I was talking about Mitt Romney at the time, and like people writing off anybody who voted for Mitt Romney. And I think we need to bring everybody that we can into the conversation about humanity.
You know, and then, I mean, to push back a little bit, just not to push,
and hold this guy accountable too.
Right?
Is this guy the anti-racist, anti-sexist champion of the world?
That's the thing, that a lot of the complaints. I mean, we're so nauseated by this lesser of two evil exchange every time when it comes to the president. You know, and people are tired of it. But you have to think again about coalition building. How there's certain candidates that just cannot get over the edge. I'm of the belief now that if Bernie were to have won the primary, he wouldn't have not won the election. Seeing the way that it has gone, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump, and a lot of those people were voting against socialism in their minds. I'm not here to talk. I was a strong Bernie supporter. My point being is there's so much disinformation that, you know, we live in different worlds. We live in two different countries. It's insanity. I don't know what's going to fix it. I keep trying to post things about, you know, let's not allow violence to be the answer. Let's not hate each other to the point where we have to get violent with each other. But as somebody in the LGBTQ community, that you can say, I'm sure, you know, there's people that did not want to recognize your existence, you know. So how do you come to qualms with those beliefs? So you kind of touched on it in the beginning, you know, that you want to give people every chance, you know, to kind of have their rights to their own viewpoint. Is that correct?
Well, I think that for legitimate reasons, in, let's say, progressive spaces that I went through in schooling, that people have understandably adopted this intent versus impact idea, where the impact of your actions, let's say on a marginalized community or on a person from a underrepresented background, matters more than what you intended. And that's something that has been in mainstream society an evolution, a little bit, because we used to always talk about, you know, what I intended to do, like that was not my intention. Sure. Right? And where I want that conversation to be, ideally, is we recognize that both of those things matter. The impact probably matters a little bit more, but I'm not gonna throw away the intent, because that is something that is going to lead to people feeling more castigated, pushed aside.
Yes.
And who's gonna wrap their arm around those people? People like Trump. Trumpism isn't gone. Tom Cotton might run. Mike Pompeo might run. You know, like
Rubio. I mean, Rubio, who's somebody that I disagree with on policy, but I've actually liked some of the moves he made when he spoke in Florida to the kids that were the victims in the Parkland shooting. You know, that he was there. He challenged ideas about gun rights, gun safety, all that stuff. Now, he was in front of a ton of people during COVID, cheering on the people that were trying to run the Biden bus off the road in Texas. And he's basically taking a page out of the Trump playbook, where he's like, wow, I need to be mean to get support. That is a dangerous thing that people need to acknowledge. And I think politics are emotional, and politics are about beating your opponent, you know, but sometimes at the end of the day, we need to remember how we go about it. The problem is that you have one side. Well, there's vitriol from both sides. There's vitriol inside of the Democratic Party for other Democrats. So, I mean, it's coming from both sides, where it's end all be all who cares about your intent? You did something I don't like, go away forever. That we need to get better than that. We need to be better. And one of the things I admire about you and what I think that you're trying to say, or you are saying, that I'm trying to paraphrase, is that you want to give people a space to be wrong or to evolve, and so that they can vocalize their thoughts on something and be heard from, even if their thoughts are something you vehemently disagree with. And I admire that so much, that we have to hear each other. We have to hear our hearts and our intent, like you were saying, where your heart's at, so that we give each other time to educate each other. And that's what you and Isaiah were talking about, which I really thought was a great conversation about just the education of the pain that our actions and words can cause each other. Sometimes the person that's causing the pain, or I mean, the person that's feeling the pain has to allow the person that is quote unquote causing it to be heard from as well, because communication is a two-way conversation, so I don't know. We're in a really bad spot.
It is a really serious issue that you're talking about, the hatred. And that's, how can that be a good thing, really? Like, okay, maybe if you're someone who has always been, very, let's say you have socialist views about the world and you want to catalyze, revolution, maybe you think that intensity of the rhetoric now is going to take us to a direction where we really can advocate for those things. But that would, I think, only happen in a situation where the union breaks apart,
Sure.
that and I don't know if that's a good thing. I would probably say it's not a good thing,
right?
But actually, I used to teach a little bit of geography, and governing a geographically large state is really challenging. And that's often when you get authoritarian leadership. People's Republic of China, Russia, look at these really big countries. Brazil, you're going to find leadership that is people like, I don't know, like there's this firmness that people really like. And I would say that, yeah, exactly.
They handle COVID better. So there's that. No, I'm just joking. They're like, you have no rights.
Well, the peaceful transfer of power that we hope to see, Patty, if the extent to which it comes, it's going to be based on, I think, the staffers, the civil servants in the White House and the Trump administration, who are willing to offer this path towards helping out Biden and Harris become the new, taking over the reins, right? Obama did this the very next day. He called Clinton on election night, asked her to accept that it was not looking possible that she would win. She conceded the next morning. Obama had Trump in the White House that next day. And it's not surprising, but it's still sad that we have a president who's not willing to do that.
I'm hoping he resigns. I think that it's in the realm of possibility that he will resign, that he will leave before it's time, so that he doesn't have to transition. That would be the perfect scenario, because my problems with Donald Trump have never been about Republican politics, because I don't think he's a Republican. He's a con man. He has no soul. I mean, it's that simple. He doesn't believe anything that he doesn't have conviction other than narcissism. It's about him, and that's it. And so I look at the people that have supported him, and I feel sorry for them, because they have been duped, like you had said before. Before we get out of here,
he used to threaten people with lawsuits all the time. He's very litigious. And so now, what is he suing the state of Georgia over? 53 ballots. 53 ballots that are moved off a table. He's trying to do a lawsuit in Pennsylvania over 93 mail-in ballots. These are things that are such a last ditch effort that are going to have no impact. And if he wises up, and if people around him that aren't Rudy Giuliani and whose last names are not Trump are able to, like Chris Christie's been trying to push him towards accepting that he fucking lost. And I guess that would be helpful. But honestly, I think a lot of us are just looking forward to not caring about him and his ego.
Oh yeah, that's
not
it.
Caring about the fact that he's gonna die a narcissist, like he's
when Ben Shapiro. When I agree with Ben Shapiro, then that's a pretty interesting situation. There's times that I've had crossover with beliefs with Rand Paul, because he's a true libertarian. He caves sometimes and does what's for the corporate best interest, but that's not the point. The point is that there's times where there's crossover because I truly believe in freedom and democracy, and so what we are going to see with Trump in the next coming weeks is really dangerous. Before we get into the ending of this long election, we have to talk about Kamala Harris. Because Biden is
Beautiful.
obviously the winner of the presidency, but the historic moment, we touched on it a little bit in the beginning of this about checking a box. With Kamala Harris, I think that her record, she's got some really troublesome things in her history as a attorney general. That's been talked about ad nauseum. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. The representation for certain people in this country that can see that, the glass ceiling is being broken, or she is a woman of color. There's a lot of pushback from people that question, they talk about this amount of blackness. I'm not trying to have that debate. The debate that I'm trying to talk about is, what do you, as a person of color, you could answer this and I couldn't. What does it mean to you to see a person of color put into that role?
I'm very, very, it's overwhelmingly beautiful to me. It's not even exciting because we knew it would happen, but there's so many things I think about her that get me excited, and I want the American people to get to know her as a person as much as possible, and get to know her background and her story. And she is a blended family. What? Like, that doesn't happen.
Right.
That, and probably didn't get talked about that much because it's like there's already, like, the Rush Limbaughs of the world that are going to smear her in every possible way that they can. This idea that she's like a socialist and she's like the radical left is just not borne out by evidence. And
then there's an ad campaign that her thing was no hate, H8,
right.
And then there was
Right.
no ho. There's this push about no ho. And you know what? I'm not going to tolerate when a woman is running and someone wants to make it about sex, like literally the act of sex. It's unacceptable,
Right.
especially when we have two candidates who have men who have visibly had situations that were questionable with them groping people, including Biden. So where there's not to cut you off, but we need to stand against that. We need to stand that when somebody is going to be sexist like that. Now, I push back when I watched her debate and people were like, well, she was given the side eye, and they look at it in certain ways. And it's like, remove gender from the conversation. You know what I'm saying? Right? When you're talking about a candidate that's a woman, if you wouldn't say it about a man, then don't say it. You know what I'm saying? It's that simple. And I don't know. But yeah.
I mean, the people making that statement, most of them voted for Trump. You can't act like Trump bragging about his, okay, a lot of them voted for Trump, and you can't act like Trump didn't defend the size of his genitalia on a debate stage. You can't act like he wasn't making like all these goofy ass faces that we have.
She was bleeding out of her whatever. Yeah, I mean, but again,
but back to Kamala and representation, because we don't even.
Sorry, yeah, we sidetracked.
When you ask me how I really feel about it, man, I'm half Japanese, that's East Asian, and sometimes that can be a little bit of a different experience than South Asian. But to me, man, like the Asian American community has somebody in the White House. That was not even thought of as being a remote possibility when I was younger. Even when I believe, Jesse Jackson had run for president, and I'd seen some black senators and believing that maybe we could have a black president before Obama was elected. I never believed we would have an Asian American in the White House. Honestly, I'm not sure whether Kamala Harris will ever become president. I think it would be a real uphill road. And I'm not in this camp of people who thinks Biden is so frail he's just going to die within 4 years. Anything can happen, but
it'll be interesting to see if he doesn't run. I don't think he'll run for re-election, and it'll be interesting to see.
I don't think so either.
I think that she would be the person that the party, the corporate moderate part wing of the Democratic Party, who holds all the cards in the executive branch, they will be pushing her. Now, you talk about Asian Americans. I really think that I can say it right now in 2024, if he's on the ballot, my candidate will be Andrew Yang. Period. Hey. The more that I see of Andrew Yang impresses the crap out of me. He's willing to have conversations about the future. And though progressives might disagree, he's somebody that I actually see implementing progress towards what the future holds. So he will, if it was today, which I'm glad it's not, because we can't start the next election when the first one's not even over. Andrew Yang is somebody that I admire, and it has nothing to do with race. You know, it has very little to do. Now, his experience is really interesting to me, because it matters, and your experience and what you talk to me about it is interesting. And one of the things that white people have the privilege of having is a history where they know where they came from. A lot of times, some don't. Some they call themselves a mutt, whatever you want to call yourself. I'm an Irish American. I'm proud of my Irish heritage. I'm also Austrian and German on my dad's side, but the Irish part being Patty Rose and Patrick, it's something that I embrace and I celebrate. This is why what I've learned is people that are Black may not know what country they're from, and this is where it's a different experience. And so just to hear your experience, to hear you talk about Kamala Harris, to hear Kamala Harris talk about her experience, I think we need to celebrate that. And obviously me and you we do celebrate that, but there's people in this country that need to be inspired by that conversation, that we all have similar stories. And then Native Americans that have a different, we all have different stories, but we all have a story of origin. And I think that we need to learn to embrace those things and make it one beautiful collective America. So it matters.
I think she's just going to be an outstanding vice president, man.
She's a badass. She's a badass. She's extremely tough. What she has done as a senator has been really empowering to see, because she's tough. She's a pit bull, and I think she's going to be a great vice president. And so, yeah. And then I think that people are going to
I think into the future so much. Who's California going to get as their next senator?
Well, you cannot go wrong with Ro Khanna. Ro Khanna is one of my absolute favorite human beings in the world. Katie Porter is incredible. Katie Porter incredible. And if you're interested, look them up. We don't have a lot of time, so we have to talk about the rebranding of your podcast. So I mentioned it before. Your podcast was called Less Stupid, which I thought was really funny and good. What changed? What made you want to change it to Broken Class?
Oh, wow. Well, I was in a little bit of a different place when I started this politics idea of running for 2020. And I was really, really stressed out in New York City in 2018 and coming back to Oregon in 2019. And I had just some real frustrations and felt very isolated from living in the city. And I guess that I'm saying that to say that, like, I really wanted a voice, and I decided to do this podcast and have these conversations with people. And I've been criticized because when I quote unquote interview people, I just talk a lot. I share equal time. I edit the waveform, so I see that, I talked a little less than this person, or I talked right about the same amount. I rarely will spend more time talking, but I also talk fast, so I probably get more words in. And I just felt like I wanted to make a podcast that could, like, really get attention, and you needed an attention grabbing name. And I was frustrated with society not doing a lot of critical thinking. And so the show Less Stupid, I would always ask people at the end, people can see episode 150 1 through 175 people. I asked them, what's one way we could all be a little less stupid? Because I believed that it's not the exact same as just saying be smarter. Like, we have to actively reject the influences of intolerance, stupidity, idiocy. Like, they're at our doorstep knocking all the time. They're in our commercials, on our TVs, and on our phones. So thinking about how we reduce that influence and that impact was something that I wanted to do in conversations with artists, politicians, just anybody, business owners. So that was that. And I just kind of felt like I wasn't doing myself full justice about the tone of the show being very open and welcoming by having a name that sounds like I'm insulting people as being less stupid, or as being stupid. And that's never what I'm really doing when you listen to the show.
No.
But so Broken Class was just, I like that it's kind of can be interpreted a number of different ways, and that's always what I've liked about like my own rap name, Gradient. I know what it means to me, but other people think it means something different. Some people think it's just a math term because I'm Asian. Like, it could be a whole number of things. So I like the open-endedness of Broken Class, but really it's me trying to do something that's educational,
I like
while
it.
not currently being a teacher.
Well, and I'm sure that you looked it up to see if it existed, and we're probably shocked it didn't. If there was another podcast with the same name. So
Yeah.
that's always something when you think of something clever that really resonates with you, and then you look it up and you're like, damn it. So there is a band. I Spent the Rent was my record label, which doesn't mean anything because it was my living room, but what it means to me is I bought my first microphone with money that I spent that I should have been using for rent. So I spent the rent, and it is about the underrepresented of Lane County, my podcast, as is your Broken Class show. That's who you end up interviewing. It's funny because I can't remember her name offhand, but you'd done the interview with the woman running for county or city councilor. And you had said to her, it's like, I don't usually interview people that win, on the podcast. And I can relate to that so much because the candidates that we have are trying to reach at any audience that they can. And they come on and they're gracious enough to give us their time because they're trying to get the word out and some name recognition built, even though we have small audiences or whatever it is that are growing daily, and so we have very similar things that we do, but we have a different approach. It's really cool to get to call you my friend and to learn from you and to bounce ideas off you. There's such a growing podcast community in Lane County. Mark Molina, who actually was just elected to the board
Springfield Utility Board.
Mark Molina has his podcast where it's about leadership and business solutions. And Mark has been a guest twice on my show, and he will be again. And he's just an incredible human being and another great podcaster, And then I think Sammy Warmhands needs to get a shout out for what he does with Take 92. The podcast is incredible. It's music driven, but he's also got his Batman, Bat Fanatic, Fan Addict, however you say it, show. So Sam is just he's an incredible talent.
He's taking COVID really seriously, and I commend him for that. And when he's really just embraced the opportunity to do remote guests, calling people over the phone, and having conversations with people he really looks up to in underground punk and hip hop scenes. Like he just had a great episode with Illogic, and that guy's fucking sweet.
He gets some really
Tough Work podcast is one of my all-time favorite podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many talented people in Lane County. I was inspired by a podcast and the guy that told me to use Anchor FM that is called the Good News Podcast. And it's a short, they started as U of O students and they're all over the country now. I can't remember where they moved, but they were the ones that told me about how to go about it and what programs to use. And then I relayed that information and some trial and error on my part. And I helped the people from the Flock Pod sports podcast, Justin and Shane. I helped them kind of get off the ground behind the scenes. Shane had called me and I told him, what I had. I was so excited to share the knowledge of what programs I didn't like and what different, websites were working for me and whatnot. And that's one of the things I love about this community is we're not competitive with each other. We want to just see each other grow and we bounce ideas. We have the same guests. Sometimes we listen to each other's show to prepare for our next episode. It's really good. So Broken Class hosted by Thomas Hiura. Say your name for me because I say it wrong every time.
Well, you do it pretty well, but you make kind of a D sound and it's Hiura. Hiura. Yeah.
I'm going to can that. I'm going to record it one time when I say it right and then just say Thomas and then push play. Hiura.
I really want to do a soundboard for my show at some point.
There's all kinds of fun ideas.
Like have an iPhone app and just like, probably not the beer, but like things like that.
Like the sports shock jock. Yeah. Well, Thomas, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for doing this. Bright and early. We're going to end this with a song. So this is Gradient. Your MC name, Gradient.
I want to say if people are going to celebrate any election results, do it safely. Celebrate safely, y'all. COVID is spiking. We've had record cases the last multiple days in a row. Right. So please listen to my music at home alone and dance. No, just kidding.
Right. Yeah. So this.
Thank you. It's been a
very
lot
much,
of fun,
Thomas.
man.
You're very welcome, and thanks for doing this. And you'll be back again many times. I want to be a guest on your show as well. So, this is Thomas Hiura.
Last night.
Hiura.
How funny would it be if this
Gradient.
ended up on the actual
I
project?
know, aka Gradient with O
I wouldn't
Behave.
mind that. She said my shit is so fire and I wonder how she would know cause it ain't dropped yet. He said it's better than he was expecting and now he regrets that he talked shit. Z said it's cheesy, I said I'm a veteran getting this cheddar with sharp wit. They said I'm red as a laser attached to a head in a predator shark pit. Wanna start shit? I'ma say oh behave, you're my only way. I got a one-track mind, that means every song is a whole new brain. Voices inside me say Tommy don't do it to him. You're from Oregon girl, play nice. I grow a chip on my shoulder as big as a boulder though, that's my New York advice. Been absorbing knives stuck in my back, now it's cut up like 40 times. So with authority I'm trying to protect you like Esther to Mordecai. Except for these sordid rhymes, just wanna flex and impress when the floor is mine. So on this bad music shit, just the bars that I hope you get bored and buy. She said our shit is so fire and I wonder how she would know cause it ain't dropped yet. He said it's better than he was expecting and now he regrets that he talked shit. Z said it's cheesy, I said I'm a veteran getting this cheddar with sharp wit. They said I'm red as a laser attached to a head in a predator shark pit. I'm retarded, I'm a faggot, I'm a lot if you wanted one packet. I'm an arsonist with no matches, kinda hard to diss, I'm so batshit. Not a doubt that my kingdom is tragic, and my bars are quick, load that shit. I'm a redneck, I pro bass fish, but nobody ever called me a fascist.